talking about the Arab Spring may seem like old news, or maybe new news because suddenly Egypt is kind of back in the headlines a bit. In reality, though, it's not really either. It's not old in that it's not a thing of the past. Protests have been ongoing since it started in several places, so it's not old news. It's not new news because it's been happening for quite a while, and it's actually barely news at all in most of the world. Some people have some idea that something's happening in Egypt. For the most part, people have completely forgotten about Syria, and other things are happening all over the place, and we've kind of, got some hype around it when it was still called the Arab Spring in 2011, and then kind of lost traction. Arab Spring. I really have a problem with this term. It's used by a lot of journalists and news commentators and political scientists and yada yada yada. To my mind, neither of the terms is accurate or correct, and in fact rather harmful. One, Arab Spring. It was not a uniquely Arab phenomena. It is true that the events that really started the media hype around the protests in 2011 were both in Arab countries. Egypt and Tunisia certainly got the most media attention, and also had the biggest obvious government changeovers. Right, so it was Arab in that sense. However, protests were happening all over the world. Plenty of non-Arab countries in Africa and Asia were seeing protests. The United Kingdom was seeing protests, as was Israel, and several other Western nations. Not uniquely Arab, and I think to classify it as that does a disservice both to the Arabs and to the non-Arab protesters. People were disgruntled with economic situations, with unemployment opportunities, with corruption in their governments, and they were trying to let governments know that. It was not something that was uniquely Arab. It was not uniquely Arab governments who were doing poorly, according to their people, so we shouldn't classify it as that. But the issue that I really have with the term Arab Spring is the spring part. Two possible connotations here. Spring as in the season. Aside from the completely logistical fact that it actually started in the winter, Arab Spring, as in the season, makes it seem like, a quick season, it's done. It's not done. It has never been done. Syria is still in the grip of horrific violence. Egypt is once again in a state of emergency with curfew, etc. Awful things are happening when people are trying to speak up. This is not short, it is not quick, it is not simple. There's nothing spring about this, and that, all of the blooming has not taken place and is not over. Then also spring, if you think of something that comes out of the ground and is, magnificent and magical and, no one really knows where the source is or anything. These were not protests that just suddenly happened. There was a lot of groundwork going on, a lot of organizational, logistical work, a lot of planning that went into a lot of these protests. Yes, some of them were hastily put together, but that doesn't mean they came from nowhere. The disgruntlement didn't come from nowhere. People weren't just protesting for the sake of protesting. And in many cases, there were people who had been doing work for years along the same issues, and suddenly were able to get a little bit more attention to it. This did not spring up from nowhere. Nor did it spring into a glorious summer and the issues are taken care of. Okay? So, not uniquely Arab, not really so spring-like. In academic writing, I tend to use the term the revolutions of 2011 if I'm talking specifically about the turnovers of government that took place in 2011. If I'm talking about kind of the protest wave in general, I say the revolutions and protests that began in 2011 because, again, still happening. Maybe I'm making too big of a deal out of this. It's just a phrase, right? But I really believe that the way we talk about things and the way we refer to things has a lot to do and a lot of power in shaping our understanding and influence of them. And to continue to use the, to my mind, completely and totally incorrect phrase Arab Spring, I think does a lot of damage and harm and is not appropriate and is really hurting people who are still hurting and still working, and they deserve our respect and attention and support.